Hi there and welcome to Hearthside. I'm the author on this blog. This is just my accessible video version for one of my posts. And you can follow me on YouTube, you can follow me on my blog or Instagram or Facebook under Hearthside or Hearthside Community Blog. And this particular post, if you've been with me for a while, you know that each year I've been using Rune Rasmussen's book, the Nordic Animist year, just sort of playing around with it and seeing if the rune poems can be used using his calendar as a kind of farmer's almanac and what that would look like. Now, this is completely experimental, highly UPG, and I'm not sure that I personally believe that it works either. It's just something that I'm playing with, and the only way to know if it actually is successful is to keep doing it. And so each year I've been using whatever the rune is that is associated with that year according to this book, talking a little bit about what it means with the rune poems and trying to relate it back to previous years that would have been assigned the same rune under this system, and seeing if there's maybe patterns or cycles that are going on during that 19-year cycle. So this year is the R rune, or Gjerde. R is what it is called in the Swedish rune poem. And we'll just go through a little bit about what I found here. So, normally I've been trying to post these videos more in about February, just so I can sort of get a little bit of sense of the flavor of the year. Unfortunately, my months have gotten away from me, so I posted this in May, and here we are in June already. I'd been thinking about it for a long time. There's just too many other things going on, as it were. Alright, so the R year, or the Gjerde year, is the year. So happy year, I guess? I don't know. But more seriously, it looks like it's marking the end of a period of stagnance. I was saying, in this case, probably COVID, and we're emerging into something new, filled with greenery and abundance. So we can expect warmer weather, better crops, and just coming out of the stagnance at the level of society as well. So let's have a look at the Swedish rune poem first. So the English translation is, year is richest in leaves, year makes all well. So here we're hearing that there is green growth, return from the stagnance, just as I was mentioning. We can expand on it by looking at the other rune poems from various sources. So the Icelandic rune poem says, plenty is boon to men, and good summer and thriving crops. So you can see in this particular case, it's focusing on crops and the abundance of mankind and what we will receive in regard to abundance from the land. Moving on to the Norwegian poem, it says, plenty is a boon to men. I say that Frodi was generous. So I find this one in particular very interesting because it mentions Frodi, who was associated as a king who brought abundance to his land, but Frodi has also been associated with Freyr, because there's a story about Frodi and a story about Freyr that are very, very similar. So this suggests a special amount of abundance going beyond the ordinary, which seems to be very significant, especially since this is the year of Aun or year of Un, depending on which system you're subscribing to here. And of course the last rune poem that we're looking at is the Anglo-Saxon, and the Anglo-Saxon one's always interesting because it was written down sooner, but it was written down in the context of the Christianization of the United Kingdom. So it says, Gir, sun is called joyful when God lets holy heaven's king, shining fruits, be born from earth for rich and poor. So you can see that instead of talking about Frodi and Freyr, we're talking about the Christian God. And the more literal translation of the end of this passage is that the earth bleeds to yield the fruits for rich or poor. So I think what it's talking about, it almost is talking about the fertility or the metaphor of pregnancy of the fertile earth. It's clearly supposed to be alliterative because of the way that it was written in the Anglo-Saxon with a lot of consonant sounds at the beginning of words, either H sounds in some of the verses and then B sounds, which makes it harder when you're translating into English to keep the poetics but also keep the meaning. So there's been a couple different translations of this one. It seems that a lot of translations read it as saying that the earth is suffering rather than giving birth, but that seems more like a Christian metaphor when the Christian God has obviously been substituted for Frodi or Freyr. So to me it seems like talking about the creation of the fertility of the land through a pregnancy. Maybe we could relate Freyr and Gerder or something like that. Yeah, so this is really interesting to see how it progressed over time and what things each group thought were important in their rune poem. So now we are moving on to looking at what happened in the same cycle 19 years ago. And I always look agriculturally at Sweden and also Canada because that's where I live, and also politically on a world scale, and just sort of extrapolate what we can expect this year. So if we're looking at the historical data from Sweden for 2004, there's not really much to note that occurred this year. The highest temperature of the year was in August at about 30 degrees Celsius. There was also more precipitation this year than previous years, and that potentially improved agriculture, but there were also a bunch of agricultural reforms that happened in Sweden at this time, so the data is a bit hard to read. If we move to looking at Canada in 2004, there was also a lot of precipitation in the form of rain and snow, particularly in Alberta. However, BC experienced a lot of summer wildfires due to drought conditions. And that's really caught my eye for Canada because we had a news story back in January 2023 about a polar vortex hitting the prairies with similar cold temperatures to the winter of 2004. So maybe that's a recurring trend. And now, and this is after I've written this blog, most of Canada is on fire. So again, maybe a cycle or maybe just climate change. It's hard to say. But I know even my American friends have seen the effects of our wildfire season so far. So I apologize for that, but most of us are on fire, not Manitoba so much so far, please. Yeah. So yeah, looks like there are some similar elements, similar precipitation trends potentially, and also similar drought trends. I was very interested in the and looking further back, so I looked back to 1985 and found that there were similar stories about weather in Canada. And then I looked back to 1966 and saw that there were similar trends in the weather as well. So there might be something there. Only time will tell as we continue this, and if I get far enough around that I get through a whole 19 years and we can look at another R year, that would be fantastic. It's hard to predict how technology is going to go in the future and what that will look like, but it's real interesting. So now moving on to the global events part of that. In 2004, the so-called War on Terror, following the period of stagnance caused by 9/11, which was the previous stagnance cycle. So this War on Terror in 2003 moved into Iraq, making the focus of 2004 the acquisition of resources, in particular oil. So are we seeing something similar? I know we're having some economic things going on here. What resources might be missing at this time? There was also big discussion on climate change, renewable energy and technology, and lots was happening in space news, which I thought was interesting, including the landing on Mars. The global economy was surging, but it was at risk of imbalance. Nearly all economies experienced an increase in employment or underemployment in the past few years of global slowdown, and employment always lags other aspects of a recovery. So this sounds familiar to what we're experiencing coming out of COVID. There was a spike in inflation, and the year itself looked like it was good economically, but there was warning signs that there was a bigger economic issue. So what does it all mean? It means that agriculture may actually be really good in the R year, both for Canada and Sweden, with the exception of the wildfires here, because I'm sure that there's a lot of land that has been made unusable at this point. Especially I've heard in Atlantic Canada they're having a lot of problem with losing a lot of land. But overall, it might be a good year for growing things. The earth does bleed to yield the fruit. So, although there are chances of drought and wildfires, there's still a possibility for it to be a good agricultural year. And despite having blizzard conditions in January of this year, that actually led to perhaps a better growing season earlier in the planting time of this year. And then on a larger scale, we see the effects of coming out of a period of stagnance. We see the economic growth in fields that have been affected by what caused the stagnance in the first place, so in this case, COVID. However, we also see a renewed optimism. So my example in 2004 was the investment in space travel. Something that was a little bit extra, that maybe when people were feeling insecure were not willing to put funding towards. So that can lead to growth in other fields and to a growing economy, but this growth is cautionary. It requires that we take measures of sustainability to avoid the pitfalls of another recession. We need to plan ahead, and as we can currently see, there's staggering inflation occurring, and that's not sustainable. At some point, something will go wrong. So 2023 is a year of plenty for us, but we must keep our eyes on the future. We need to invest for sustainability, both for our families and our communities, by preserving what comes to us this year, so that when we have leaner years, we will be able to move ahead. And also on a larger scale, looking at mitigating the climate and economic crises that are looming. So this all seems very fitting, especially for the year of Aun, or year of Un, and that is that it's about a resetting in the way that we run things in order to improve lives for ourselves and lives of all beings in the future. So yeah, that's how this year is looking for us. I hope you found this interesting, at least. Like I said, it's pseudoscience at best, but I definitely, so far I'm seeing trends. Am I seeing trends because I'm looking for trends, though? That's the way of it. So whether or not you find this of any value or whatever, I don't know, but it's just something fun I'm playing around with. So I am moving on to some other blog entries that I've also already written, and hopefully you find some of them interesting as well. So I'll see you soon.